We are here with John Carter, the writer of Postcards from Barsoom, a Substack publication with over 10,000 subscribers. And for anyone listening, 10,000 subscribers on Substack is top 1% of 1%. So I'm super excited today to talk with John about independent writing, growing on Substack, and some of his ideas that he's sharing with the world. So, John, pleasure to have you here.
Is it really the top 1% of 1%? Remarkable.
I think
Thank
it
you
is.
very much for having me on your show.
So, first question is, what are some of the benefits of remaining pseudonymous?
Yeah, so pseudonymity, I think this is an old question. Should you put your face out there uh, and your name, stand behind your own ideas like that? Or should you maintain that sort of veil of secrecy that protects your private life from your public life? Um, and obviously, I've chosen the latter so far. Maybe that'll change at some point in the future. But so first of all, just from a very practical perspective, um, in the current dispensation, um, there are real risks to saying unpopular things. Professional risks can make it very difficult for you to find a job. You can get fired from your job. Um, there have been cases where things people have said on the internet have come back to haunt not only them but their friends and family members. Some people will lose relationships with friends and family members because of things they've said. Um, and so if you want to have kind of the ability to be relatively unfettered, um, remaining pseudonymous is kind of the way to go. So, the same way the founding fathers in the U.S., um, or the Federalists, I should say, quite a few of them wrote under pen names. Um,
I think it's wise. I think it's
yeah,
wise because it's, yeah, like you said, it might change in the future. You can go from pseudonymous to not, but going in the other direction, it's probably not going to work out as well. Um,
it can be
I
done. I
think
mean,
that's
there have
wise.
been there have been writers who they write under their own name, or they have one pen name they write under, and then they start writing in a different genre or something, and they put that out under a different pen name, and sometimes people have no idea. So it's certainly not impossible, but it is, I agree, easier to go from being pseudonymous to being anonymous, I suppose. I actually had an
Yes.
essay. I had an essay like a couple of years ago. I think I wrote it for my first like 1 year anniversary, maybe, uh, called the anonymity question, where I sort of like looked at sort of precisely these kinds of issues. So in my case, I'm not terribly concerned at a professional level because I'm not really doing anything but Substack at the moment. So I remain pseudonymous mainly to sort of protect the people in my private life from social consequences from some of the outrageous things that I say on the internet. Uh, and
Mhm.
also for sort of personal psychological reasons. Like if I was writing
Mm.
under my own name, then everything I put out, I would always have at the back of my mind, like, oh, like, what if my mom reads this? Or,
Yup.
what if like, this friend of mine reads this or something? And then that would, you know, maybe make me bite my tongue a little bit and not say something that maybe I need to say. Uh, so it's freeing in that respect. The danger, of course, is that you can go much too far with it and say really ridiculous things that when you do get doxxed, when if it rebounds on you much more badly. So it requires a degree of self control, I think, to write well when you're pseudonymous.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. I was writing not under my full name, and I didn't share with any of my family. Uh, And then recently, my parents have found my online presence, and they are now reading everything. So
Oh God.
now yeah, I'm thinking about, like, I find myself thinking about what other people are thinking about, I'm thinking about, and it's just something that I would like to skip. So perhaps I'll need to start a new publication. But I want to dive a little bit into your backstory, which I've read a little bit about, which and correct me here, but I'll try to sum it up. It's You're in Canada,
Hmm.
and you knew that you wanted to be a sci-fi writer from a relatively young age, and then you went and studied physics, in part to enhance your sci-fi writing. You were on track to become a physics professor. You were doing research in physics. The COVID thing happened. You said, "No, I'm not doing the government mandated mRNA." You said, "See you later. I'm gonna become an independent writer," and now you have 10,000 subscribers on Substack and your full-time Substack. Is that roughly correct?
That's pretty good actually. So the one thing I think I might correct you on a little bit, or not even correct you, but sort of flesh out a tiny bit, would be like, what led me down to this path of like substacking, right? Which, yeah, the mRNA jabs, that was a bit of a factor. My previous employer spent a few months trying to force me to get one. Although in the end, all I had to do was sort of wait them out and and then finally submit a religious exemption, and they weren't able to do anything. It was a lot, so that stuff actually was a lot easier for me than it was for many of my friends who dealt with quite a bit more professional pressure than I did. um, the real thing was sort of the job market. So around that time I was applying for positions, and a good number of them were demanding that you be jabbed. And I was like, well, I'm not going to apply to those. Screw that. So I don't want to like get a jab, get a job only to then be told I have to get a jab
Yeah.
to actually get the job. But then the other thing, which has actually ended up being, for me at least, more significant, is all the DIE stuff,
Mm.
usually referred to as DEI. So, like in academic um, job applications, for a few years now, it's become pretty standard to have to include a diversity statement, which is, for anyone in your audience who's not like familiar with how academic job applications work, your typical application package is a pretty thick document. You've got your CV, your curriculum vitae, which is, you know, all several pages long itself. It's got your publication list and all the places you've studied and what your scientific expertise is, and then you have a teaching statement which sort of explains like your philosophy behind teaching and what you've taught, and techniques that you used and so on. Then you have a research statement, which is like what you do scientifically and what you're planning on doing in the future. And all of that, of course, is directly relevant to the position. And then they started saying, no, you have to write this little essay about how much you love diversity and inclusion and equity, and demonstrate that you are a good little cultural Marxist. And I just chafed at that. I couldn't bring myself to do it. It was like compelled speech of that form, ideological loyalty oaths. I just refused, and that ended up walling off like almost every single position in North America was requiring those. And then I started realizing that even abroad in Europe, or well, mainly in Europe, to be honest, they weren't requiring diversity statements, but they were absolutely requiring that you talk about diversity in everything else, right? So they couldn't force you to do it at like the systemic level, but there was this kind of like informal built-in assumption that had spread through the academic sector that if you're not on board with the diversification of Western civilization, then you are not welcome in the academy, frankly. So I got pretty demoralized by all of that, to be honest. And that's part of what I've written about on my blog. Um, and yeah, so sort of what sort of happened was like sort of during that period of me sort of like trying to put out job applications and you know not applying to a lot of places because I was just like, well, I'm not writing a diversity statement. And then the Substack thing was like a sort of hobby side project that I was just kind of like using to scream into the hurricane, um, which then kind of remarkably started attracting a bit of attention and readership started growing and then it started making money for me. And I started thinking, well, do I really need an institutional affiliation, or can I just sort of do this stuff myself and not have to worry about getting the approval of the human resources department or some anonymous uh, committee reviewing job applications.
Right. Yeah, and I have a couple questions there. Are you able to talk about some of the work you were doing in physics? Like, are you bummed that you kind of like had to like leave physics? Because I don't see you writing a lot about physics, like on your on postcards from Barsoom, but has it influenced the publication?
Oh, sure. I don't, I mean, I haven't written directly about anything regarding my research in academic science, largely because I don't think it would be particularly interesting to anyone, but
Mm,
also because it was a small field and it'd be an incredibly great way to get myself doxxed. Um,
right, right.
so I've kind of I've maintained like a lot of uh, distance between that part of my life and writing on Substack. But another reason for that is I spent the last decade or so sort of ensconced in academic science. Almost everything I wrote throughout that period, scientific papers or uh, you know various forms of applications or um, it's all like sort of formal scientific writing is the point. And that's a certain kind of writing. It's got certain conventions to it. And after just doing that for like so long, I was kind of bored with it, frankly. And I
Yeah.
wanted to start doing. I wanted to have fun with writing again, and that's one of the things I try to do on postcards from Barsoom. Is I try not to let things get trapped stylistically into any particular genre of like op-ed or philosophy writing or whatever. I'm trying to experiment stylistically and with subject matter and such because it's more interesting for me that way, and I think more interesting for my readers as well.
100%. I'm a reader. I just found you a few months ago. Actually, one of my clients sent me a link because I was writing about fertility and birth rates,
Mm.
and he sent me a link to writing on that. And frankly, I don't think anybody does like you with the implementation of those photographs into the text that they don't seem like immediately relevant to what you're writing about, but it gives it this ambiance. And you're writing on such a broad variety of topics. And you're just cranking out the content, like writing basically like short books, like once a month. So it's very impressive, and I wondered how much of that is, um, did you learn to write in a high volume from working in academia, and also where the hell are you getting these photographs?
Okay, so the art first. You're absolutely correct. Most of the time, it's there for vibes, to set like a bit of mood or something. Uh, just because I like the image, perhaps, or sometimes there is some relationship to the text. It sort of depends. Part of the idea there is to kind of knock the reader a little bit out of the flow of the text and sort of activate like a different part of their brain, so that they're sort of thinking hopefully a little bit more completely. And like I said, I just like how they look. So in terms of writing, did I did academia teach me to write rapidly? Hmm. That's kind of hard to say. Most academics, in my experience, don't write particularly fast. I'm sort of when I was, more I've been very inactive in the academic sciences for the last couple of years, obviously, but before that, I was known in my sort of research group as being sort of exceptionally productive. My ability to turn data analysis into publishable work, and then writing it up and actually getting it published. I've always been very fast at that. I've been writing in one form or another, man. I mean, like since I was a kid, like 7, 8 years old, maybe younger than that. It's just something I've always been doing. And even in high school, like for my final year English independent study project, I wrote a 100-page novella, like a sort of like
Wow.
fantasy sci-fi story. Um, so like I've been able to write rapidly, and I'm told well, uh, pretty much my entire life. So that was, I certainly honed that in academia a little bit, but I wouldn't say that academia taught me to do that.
Right, right. I do think the writing thing is something that people are born with and they can develop that. Um, and it's something that I was born with. I was in first grade, I was writing essays about trips that I went on when the other kids were like learning how to write their name.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I yeah,
yeah. No, there's
I did.
definitely it's a nature nurture thing, right? Like everything, and uh, certainly in my family, literacy is developed to a very high level amongst almost all of my relatives, on one side at least. I was literate before kindergarten, because my mom just sat down and taught me how to read, like from ABCs straight through to phonics before I even was, you know, in school. So I've had that for a long, long time. So I had an aptitude for it, which is reflected in the rest of my family. So certainly there's, if you were to like dissect our brains, like maybe you'd find like Broca's area or Wernicke's area or something was like particularly well developed, um, in our family. But like that's all useless if you don't have the nurture, right? Like if you don't have the exposure to literacy uh, and such, then like it wouldn't mean anything. So they're both very important.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, like often my best writing, it's like I'm not really trying. I'm not like, okay, I need to sit down and write for 2 hours, like from like 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Like it's like late at night, I'm like snacking and like I don't know, I'm just like thoughts are flowing and I just throw them in my phone and then that from something that's probably like anything I've written that's gonna stand the test of time was like after midnight, just me bullshitting, trying to make myself laugh. So, do you feel the same way? What's your workflow like? Do you work late at night? Are you like a 9 to 5 guy?
I don't even think of it as a workflow, to be honest. I do most of my writing um, in the afternoon or sometimes in the early evening. It's very rare that I'm writing anything past about 7 or 8 p.m. By that
Wow.
point, because I tend to wake up pretty early, so by that point, like I'm tired. I just want to like, you know, lie on the couch and read a book. Um, I will have spurts of productivity. So I'll have like, short periods where I'll be at it like 8, 9, 10 hours a day. And then I'll have periods where the last thing I want to do is write. And procrastinate like mad. And actually, so I mean, it's funny, it's like many readers have remarked that I'm very productive. Uh, I don't feel productive. I usually feel very lazy, in fact. Like I'm only writing like, a few hours a day or something, or I might not write anything for like a week. And then I'll just go hard on something for a while. Sometimes some projects, each one is different. I mean, like sometimes I'll have an idea and I'm like, I have to get this out now. And I'll sit down and 6 hours later, like it's finished and I hit the publish button. Other times, I'll have a similar kind of like, I have to get this out. And then I realize like, this is much bigger than I thought it was. So like the one I had
Mm.
last month, Reenchantment, like I did not expect that to hit 20,000 words. Like when I started, like at all, like that I thought that was going to be a much like a couple thousand at most, and it just kept sort of growing and growing and growing, and I almost couldn't do it. I couldn't really do anything about that. It felt like I was not really um, in control entirely. Like it was like I'd been possessed by the muse. And that went on for like
Yeah.
a couple of weeks. And I like, frankly, since then, I've just been exhausted. Like, when it was finished, I just like collapsed and I was just like, yeah, still kind of
Yeah.
recovering from that. Yeah.
You just start rolling the snowball and it just starts rolling down the hill and hits like escape velocity and then it's gonna stop whenever it wants to. Um,
That's
so I
sort of
guess
it.
you know
Yeah.
when you kind of like know when you're done when you've like squeezed all the juice out of your brain.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the time I'm done when I can't emotionally stand to look at it anymore. like just the very thought of trying to edit the damn thing again, just like,
Oh,
start my eyebrow starts twitching. And then like when I start to hate it, and like at that point I'm like, okay,
yeah.
okay, I hate this now. It's probably ready for this to go out.
I hate this now. It's done. It's ready to go out. Yeah, that's how it is. That's honestly how it is. But I'm not writing 20,000 word pieces. I'm writing 2,000 word pieces. Like for my weekly posts. So I can only imagine like the editing process. That was my next question. Like, are you editing these? Like, I just can't imagine editing
Oh
something that's
yeah.
20,000 words.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Do
yeah,
you
of
work with
course.
anyone?
Nope. Uh Nope. I've got, plenty of friends and sort of like Substack colleagues, you might say, other sort of like professional and semi-professional writers, but I don't lean on any of them for editing services at all. I don't think
That's
I've ever sent a
wild.
piece to someone and asked them
It's crazy.
to look at it first before I publish it. Maybe I should in some cases, honestly. I can be a bit lacking in self-discipline sometimes, but uh, I can be a bit, I do think I can be a bit self-indulgent in like, it's like, did those 6 paragraphs really need to be there or could that have been condensed? But I'm like, oh, but I like the prose so much. Like I'm gonna keep it.
Mm.
Uh, but my editing process it's very iterative. So, I'll write something and then I'll go through it again and, tweak some things as I go. And then I'll write some new text and then I'll sort of build that in maybe, and I might shift things around a little bit and be like, oh, like these 3 paragraphs really belong earlier in the essay or something, and then I'll go through again, not just like looking for typos or whatever. But so one of the things that I try to do um, is I try to look at what I'm writing through different eyes. um, so like you know I'll go through once and try to think like an engineer or a scientist. Kind of like rational and you know calm and okay, what's the actual argument here? Does this make sense? What are possible objections and so on. And then I'll go through another time and try to look at it more as a poet. Like, you know, um, is this the best way
Mm.
to put this? Can this sentence be rephrased in a more elegant fashion? Uh, and um, and then I'll
So
pay
you're wearing different.
attention. I'll pay attention
You're
to like
wearing different.
what's the emotional valence of how I've written this. Like how does this make me feel to read this? Um, as well as like, what does this make me think? So I doing each of those simultaneously is very difficult. So I'll sort of go through in different moods, like and sort of like try to like change the text a little bit to be, a little bit more clear or a little bit more well phrased or a little bit more emotionally compelling and so on. And it sort of gradually takes shape through that iterative process.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Like you're wearing different hats at different times rather than trying to do it all simultaneously. The other thing I'm wondering is like when you're not, working on postcards from Barsoom, um, I'm sure you're reading. I'm sure you read a lot, and I'm sure you get a lot of inspiration. Um, Other than that, do you go out in the world? I get worried about like writers who don't like go out in the world and like get inspiration from that. Like for me, like almost all my writing comes from real world experiences. So I'm curious, like what else are you doing? What are you reading? What kind of activities are you doing outside of Substack?
I go to the gym pretty regularly. I go for long walks. Like, I'll go for like an hour, couple hours sometimes, and just kind of like try to get out into nature and uh, just watch, just try to turn my brain off a little bit, but also just like let the thoughts kind of like flow naturally. Um,
Yeah,
that was something I got from Nietzsche when I was a teenager, when I was really into him. And he, wrote, I think it was in Beyond Good and Evil, but it might have been somewhere else. And he talked about how like you should never trust a thought that came to you when you were sitting. You know, like if it didn't come to you when you were walking around, like don't. And I was like, man, that's. So I've always tried to make use of that. Um, I go to the bar every once in a while, sit down at the bar, just chat with people. Uh, try to get a sense of like what people are thinking, just the ordinary man on the street sort of thing. But I would, I'm, I'm very, I'm very much a modern in the sense that like, my social life is almost entirely mediated through a screen. Um, my friends are in my phone, like the case for almost all of us. Uh, um, last couple of years I've been living in a fairly small place, so there hasn't it's not like being in a city where you have access to um, large numbers of interesting people potentially around you. uh, so like you take intellectual engagement where you can find it. In terms of reading, I go back and forth between um, fairly heavy books, like history, philosophy, things like that. And probably the last really big, thick book I read along those lines was Ian McGilchrist's The Matter of Things, which is like this like 1,600 page, 2 volume, densely footnoted, just thick, thick, thick book. That took me a while to get through. But I'll also like, I'll go from that to then like I'll wallow in like genre, like, fantasy or sci-fi for months at a time. Like the last couple of months, I spent working my way through Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere books, his Mistborn trilogy, and I just finished like a couple days ago the fourth 1,200 page volume of his Stormlight saga. Um,
nice. Do you read Substack as well?
of course, of course. Um,
So
I think I've got like almost probably like 200 Substacks that I subscribe to. I don't read all of them by any means. Um, well, there are quite a few that like honestly like I probably haven't actually read anything by them like since I subscribed. Uh,
yeah,
there are others that like there are I can't actually think of any that I will read every single thing they put out, even if I really like their stuff. Like there just isn't enough time in the day, frankly, and it can get
yes, yeah.
get very exhausting. Um, So like, if something catches my eye and it looks particularly interesting, I'll read it. And if I like it, I'll share it and what have you. Um, but even like my friends, frankly, I don't read everything they put out because it just takes too much time. I was doing this roundup thing, the right, as in like writing right wing roundup. That I did that for like 6 months last year, and I was trying like every week to sort of summarize um, the what had been written in like sort of a right wing Substack, basically, like very broadly defined. Uh, and people liked that. Although the engagement wasn't great because roundups engagement is never great. The people who liked it really liked it. And it was fun to do, but it was also like it was getting to the point where I was spending, you know, 20 hours a week reading Substacks and like and I was like trying to like skim through them as fast as I could, and like it just wasn't fun anymore, and I was starting to hate it. And I was just like starting to become resentful towards my friends for writing long essays, and I was like, you motherfucker, you published this like Friday evening, just as I was putting the finishing touches on it, like you knew it, you did this on purpose, now I have to read it, yeah, fuck you. And like then I was like, yeah, like I just stopped doing it because like it was making it something that should be fun not fun anymore. And since then I've been a lot more relaxed about um reading everything basically.
Do you know Ted Gioa on Substack?
Yes, I subscribe to him. He's great.
Yeah, yeah, he's solid. I just watched him on the David Perel podcast, and I've been reading his stuff, and I actually didn't know that he was like a 65 or like 70-year-old guy, but he's actually really cool and has like a ton of experience in the writing world. And so I've been reading
Hmm.
his stuff, and yeah, he's like over 100,000 followers on Substack, and
Hmm.
like we're just getting started, it's like the very early days of Substack, and one thing that he talks about is the legacy media is failing. He like chronicles that as he
Hmm.
pays attention to the culture, and it's like, you know, they're doing layoffs at like every place. Meanwhile, his Substack is like growing 100% every year, and so is mine. Mine's growing,
Hmm.
yeah, double digits like every few months.
Hmm.
So what do you think of that? Do you think the tide is turning? Like, at what point do we consider mainstream media alternative media, and actually it's
Mm.
independent writers who are now the mainstream?
Well, I have not been using the phrase mainstream media for a couple of years because I concluded a couple of years ago that it was no longer an accurate descriptor. Um,
Right.
you know, it, it's when you actually go out into the world and you talk to people, where are they getting their information from? And almost no one under the age of about 50 regularly watches CNN or reads the New York Times or what have you. Basically, everyone is getting their information from I, the cloud, I guess you could say, the network. People have like these multiple sources of information ranging from blogs to YouTubers to podcasters to um, uh, online magazines and so on and so forth. And they usually have like um, a few voices that they like and trust. And beyond that, you sort of take things with like a bit of a grain of salt. But you're getting it from like multiple perspectives, at least ideally. I think most people these days are doing that. Maybe those perspectives are good perspectives, maybe they're not good perspectives. There's a lot of bullshit out there, obviously. Um, in fact, probably the majority of it is bullshit. But it seems to me that the legacy media, like a couple of years ago, it felt like uh, there was a subtle shift in the relationship between what we used to call the alternative media um, and the mainstream media, where before about 2022 or so, the narrative was set by corporate media, and then online media would sort of scramble to interrogate that perspective, poke holes in the narrative, and so on. So one was active and one was reactive primarily, and that dynamic seemed to they seemed to switch places a couple years ago, and they've increasingly sort of filled those different roles since then. So, now you'll often find like, the legacy media is responding to some conspiracy theory or something that has gotten very popular on the internet, or they're trying to pre-bunk things, or and the point is they're actually in a reactive, responsive mode now increasingly, whereas the narratives are increasingly driven by the swarm, by the cloud, whatever you want to call it, and I think that's very hopeful personally, uh, because it does portend a shift in control over the governing narratives of society from a few small people or a few small organizations, a handful of people, to uh, something which is like more participatory and more broad based. It doesn't mean that like we don't have to worry about manipulation anymore. It does mean that the manipulation gets much harder for the forces that want to sort of put lies out there, or vector society in one direction or another, because instead of just having to, you know, push their message out through a few newspaper publishers and uh, television networks, they have to finance these legions of shills and operatives who are pretending to be anons, or what have you. No, and none of them having a huge degree of influence compared to like what the amount of influence that a television network had during its heyday. So uh, yeah, I mean, like overall, I'm very optimistic about the direction that that's gone, and most of the efforts that the system has been making to try and censor speech, or manipulate the narrative in one way or another have not really actually been all that effective. Um, Censorship just hasn't worked. Uh, when people are too obviously trying to manipulate the narrative, usually there's a lot of pushback from the audience. They might lose audience. Um, like they're sort of on an equal playing field with the rest of us. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question a bit. Um, in terms of
Yeah,
growth
I concur.
potential, in terms of growth potential, I think there's a huge amount of that still, and not just in
Oh
like
yeah.
sort of politics or journalism, what have you. You also see like the explosion in self-publishing, indie publishing. What the sci-fi writer Brian Niemeyer, he refers to it as neo-patronage. So in his model, uh, the way forward for individual creators, rather than trying to like make it big and have like millions of people paying attention to you. You actually don't need to do that. You actually just can cultivate a small fanatical following, um, who some fraction of whom are willing to support you, and actually the number of people that you need to have like a decent middle class life is really quite small compared to like um what you would need to get by as like a New York Times bestselling author or something like that.
Right, right. Right,
Yeah.
absolutely. Because yeah, as an indie publisher, you have total control over what you say, how it looks. You can be much more efficient with your process. You can be direct with your audience. You can crank stuff out. And I'll real quick, I'll loop back to the legacy media thing. They had a partnership with big tech that was going strong for a while, where Google's going to put them at the top of the search rankings. MSNBC, ABC, whatever other acronyms, and as well Apple News was all legacy media. Twitter was doing all legacy media, but I think that's starting to break down. I think um, people are looking elsewhere. People are going to Reddit. People are using Google less. I think probably Google searches have
Mm-hmm.
topped out as people turn
Mm-hmm.
to the various chatbots, um, and so I think that connection's breaking down. And then you have Substack and X who are committed to not censoring, and I think that's on the rise. Substack's growing a lot. People like in my day to day still don't really even know what Substack is, which is great news to me. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then to fast forward to actually like surviving off of Substack or being like an independent creator and actually being able to like pay the bills. That's a big question mark. I don't really think that problem has been solved. Like almost all the writers I know are not making enough off Substack to like survive. You're like one of the
Oh
guys
God.
who I look to and I
Oh
was like,
God, no. And I'm not.
maybe
I'm not
this guy
making it.
can make it,
I,
you know?
I'm not making enough that I could live independently in Canada just off of this yet. Um,
Well, here's the thing is
I
I
probably as
think
a
that
I almost certainly could get by as a digital nomad, and I have friends who are I like on Substack who are doing that. Like they're making sort of comparable to what I'm making, and they're just like not living. They're just like staying living in
yeah,
like nice
they're in
tropical
like
cheap
Bali or
countries.
whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. So like
But
that's
at the end of the day, like I don't want to live in freaking Bali. I just don't want to do that. Like I'd feel isolated. I like North America and I'd like to stay here. And
will you be have you ever spent have you ever lived abroad?
yeah, I've been to 15 countries. I spent January and December in South America, which is like pretty
Oh,
great. I mean,
nice, nice.
yeah, but my preference is Europe and my preference is North America, but I am going to go to Brazil this winter.
But then
So I'm
you've
not done traveling
certainly
yet.
if you spend a couple months in South America, then you probably have already figured out how expat culture works. Like you go to somewhere like I spent a couple months in Colombia last year in October and November, um, and just my most recent time living abroad, and I had no trouble whatsoever meeting people. Like it was actually the
Yeah.
easiest thing
Oh
in
yeah.
it was so much easier than it is here because uh
Unbelievably easier.
yep, yep, because like you run into a white person, frankly. Like, the locals, of course, like unless you speak Spanish, like like bit hit and miss there. But like the expats, like, well, they're in the same boat you are, right? Like they don't know anyone. So like they're out, they
Yeah.
want to socialize, they want to meet people. So everyone's in that kind of mood of like, you know, like let's meet each other. So making those connections is pretty easy actually when you're living abroad. So in fact, I've actually, 'cause I spent about half of my life, my adult life outside Canada, and I've, with the exception of Sweden, actually, I found it generally very easy to meet people. Um, Sweden is a different case, but um, so yeah, I've actually found it less alienating, weirdly enough, less alienating living in foreign countries and living in the modern West. Uh, but that all that said, like yeah, I mean like the ideal, of course, like you want to be able to like support yourself living in your own country. Um, to a,
Yeah, for sure, man. I couldn't
yeah,
agree more. Like when you meet more Americans abroad outside America, you meet more Americans in Peru than I met in America. Like, if you want to make 100 friends in 100 days, go to hostels in South America.
bingo.
And
Yep.
also, yeah, the dating scene, the party scene, it's different. It's a different ball game down there. But the thing
Hmm.
that I found was a lot of the relationships are very fleeting. People are traveling, very transient, and you end up having the
Yes.
same conversation over and over. Where have you gone? How long have you traveling? What do you do? Blah blah blah. So
Yeah.
yeah, it
Yeah.
is what it is.
In order to develop like, I mean, any kind of like meaningful relationships with people, like you need to be able to like put down roots in a place. Uh,
Yeah.
it's just it's just how it is. And that is the downside of that kind of digital nomad lifestyle, is that it is extremely ephemeral. Like, you meet your best friend in the world and then like they're gone a week later and like you never talk to them again, like,
Yep,
uh,
yeah.
yeah,
This is a real
yeah,
problem for me. Like as a young person, like I actually like living in America. Some friends are here. I feel like I like the environment here. I feel at home here. My family's here. But the dating market sucks. A lot of the
yep,
jobs suck. The
yep,
culture is what it is. The expenses. But yeah, and then so down in South America, I could go on 10 dates in 2 weeks.
yep,
But I don't really want to live in South America, and actually they can't come back to America with me because they can't get a visa. So
yep,
I'm
yep.
figuring it out.
Unless you like married them or something, and then that opens up a whole other can of worms. Um,
Exactly.
and you're all and the other thing, of course, with dating in South America uh, or like Southeast Asia, uh, or Eastern Europe for that matter, is like you'll always have at the back of your mind, like, is this just because like I'm a rich
Yep,
American and they're hoping to get a visa out of it, like am I just a meal ticket, um, and like that's a real thing.
that's
So you
very
always,
real.
yeah, yeah. Um, on the
I
other
want to
on the
loop
other
back.
hand,
Oh,
the women are much better looking than a lot of the. It's really quite sad, actually. I mean, North
it is.
American women used to
What
be
happened?
like used to be the gold standard, right? Uh, yeah, and it's funny. Like if you look at the discourse around like passport bros, um, and just the sheer amount of butt hurt that you see from a lot of the female um, side of things, it's so like I've seen these like nice liberal ladies on Twitter suddenly start sounding like Goebbels on when like ripping on men for race mixing basically, like how dare you, like there's just like this deep sense of betrayal that they seem to feel, and I think it was exacerbated. There was like the passport cis movement, which was kind of stillborn a couple of years ago, where they were like, "Oh, okay, you're doing the passport. Oh, we'll do the same thing. We'll find high value foreign men since you don't want us." And then it turned out that the foreign men didn't want American women after all, and like
No,
they haven't
that's what they've told
they
me.
yeah, and they well no they're deeply disinterested, like active avoidance, right? And and I think it's gradually and very painfully sinking in for the Western female that after a century of being basically the sexual market gold standard for the entire planet, like it's actually inverted, and like they're now considered the
Yeah.
dross, absolute bottom of the barrel, and they haven't really, but their sense of entitlement is still very much like as though they are the prize, they're the princess, and it's like, yeah, you're really not. Like, you're fat, you're unpleasant to be around, like you're slovenly, you can't cook, like you have like literally nothing to offer. This is all like basic bitch manosphere talking points, really. But like, I do kind of wonder what the uh, long-term meta political consequences of that will be, because like the so-called single woke female is like um, the core of the cultural left. Uh,
Right.
and they are miserable, and it is going to sink into them, I think, inevitably. Maybe not like that cohort exactly, but like like their younger cousins and sisters and what have you are like, I think they're like looking at that and sort of like putting two and two together a little bit and being like, well, hold on, like like they've made themselves essentially the laughing stock of the planet. Like no one wants to touch them, and every girl wants to be beautiful. Every girl wants to be the center of attention, wants to be desirable. Um, like every female fantasy ultimately comes down to being the most desirable woman in the room, just like every male fantasy comes down to being the ultimate badass, right? In one way or another. And this sort of like the feminist ideology has rendered them into cave beasts, and they're sort of like realizing that. And I think that's going to lead to an incredible backlash from the female population as they're like, wait, like, what have you done to us? Like, this is horrible, And um, I look forward to it. I think that's going to be really fun to watch. Got my popcorn out.
No, I'm definitely interested to see how the relationships situation plays out in terms of young people getting married and procreating, especially the generation below us. Like we've like the kind of like very few relationship forming paths have been presented to me by the
Mm-hmm.
boomers. It's basically
Mm-hmm.
the idea is figure it out. You can kind of like go to these corporations who make these apps. You get like paired in a chat room, and then you're supposed to like kind of like show up and meet like a stranger from the internet and like. It's like this is not the women don't like that, and I'm not a huge fan either, to be honest. But like
Oh, I hate it.
it's not
And
too.
like, and
Yeah,
like, half the time, like, you meet them and you find out that you got catfished. Like, they're 60 pounds
oh yeah,
heavier than they were
no,
on the
for sure.
pictures that they took. And yeah, right. I mean, like, it's,
Yeah, yeah.
it's awful.
It's a
And
little bit
everyone hates
absurd.
it.
Like
Everyone hates
yeah,
it.
well,
Like,
like
everyone hates Tinder. Like,
yeah. So it'll be interesting to see like how that plays out because I don't think that's like a sustainable way to do relationship formation. It's like you were saying in that piece that I read last night, like the culture is shattered and we're picking up the pieces and we're trying to figure it out. And in my local community, like someone stepped up to play matchmaker, and she's at least she's trying. At least it's like the first time I've seen someone attempt to fill that role, which is like a very important
good for
role in
her.
society. So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. I honestly
yeah,
think so. I've seen, there was an AI startup. I can't remember its
yeah,
name right
yeah.
now.
Keeper
Yeah, that was it.
with
Keeper.ai. Yes, yes. And I
yeah.
thought that was a really interesting idea, although I'm a little skeptical of the execution. I understand. Like last I checked, which was a while ago, they'd only had one successful match, but that was partly because they have a
Jeez.
very small pool. What was that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Indian Bronson is one of the founders over there. I actually talked to him about
Oh,
that,
okay.
and it was, I think it was $50,000. You have to put in like an escrow account, and then they'll like get you married, and then they get the money once you're married. Or it was like something like $5,000 per match, and I mean those
Yeah,
prices are just not affordable for the reason like a
yeah. I
regular
didn't
person.
think the prices were when I was looking at. I don't remember the prices being that high. It was like, but it was like a couple $100 per match or something. Um,
Oh, okay. This was a year ago
and
I talked to him, so I'm sure they changed it.
yeah, yeah. But what I was gonna say is that like I'm sort of like bullish on social um social answers, low tech social answers to technological problems. So like, you know, the the data so that you mentioning the a girl in your local area who's acting as a matchmaker, like yeah, that's exactly the kind of thing that I sort of uh I sort of see coming down the line because I mean, like, it's just you just got this whole generation of young people who just cannot find a boyfriend or girlfriend to save their lives, can't even get a date, and everyone knows you're in this situation. And technology is not the answer because it was technology that put you in this situation in the first place. Um, there's a collective action problem because, like, okay, like you want to go out and talk to people, but when you go out, everyone's on their damn phone, like, uh, and so what do? You pull out your
I,
phone because you don't want to just sit there staring at a wall, like, um, but
no,
like,
for
and
sure.
then people sort of realize that you got okay, and then it's like, okay, what do you do? And the most obvious thing that someone could do is like if is she could be a matchmaker for her friends and start trying to hook people up. Um, and I could definitely see that working. And I've also suggested elsewhere that like if the boomers wanted to like redeem themselves, like I'm sure like every boomer woman out there has like nieces and nephews and
Not exactly though, because they did the boomers didn't have like that many kids. I think one of the big problems with the relationships market is that it's not we don't have a dense like relationship culture. For example, if like the I looked at like the number of friends that people have like on average, and it's like a lot of people just have like one or two friends. So if you like ask your friends, hey, do you guys know anyone you can match me with? And they only know one or two people. If you ask three people, it's only like six or seven people, and then but if
you're
you
absolutely
have five
you're
friends and
absolutely
yeah,
you're absolutely correct. But So I was sort of thinking like, what if you got like covens of like, middle-aged boomer ladies getting together in Facebook group chats.
Mm,
And like, yeah,
yeah,
any one of
yeah,
them only has like a handful of like marriageable young people that she knows, but between like a few dozen of them, like they start to build up a pretty large pool of people that they all sort of
right.
like individually know really well. And um, I mean, they're not going to do this because like boomers are just massively
No.
selfish, and it would never occur to them to do, you
Mm,
know, anything pro-social. Uh, but that would be
no.
one way they could actually redeem themselves instead of being uh, discivilizational Herodins tearing everything down, which is what they're actually doing. Um, but no, we can't look to them uh, for salvation here. We have to solve this problem ourselves. Um, and
Yeah.
and I do tend to think that it's going to have to come down to like really proactive uh, social technologies, bringing back old things like matchmaking, um, along with probably slut shaming and you know sexual mores that start going a little more traditional, and um, all of those things are going to have to happen. Uh, but like, I don't see that happening quickly, um, or
No.
bloodlessly either. Like, I think, frankly, we're in this kind of situation where you've got a probably a majority of the young population have no prospect of reproducing, and are kind of
It's a
semi-conscious of
bold
that.
statement.
Yeah, yeah. But well, statistically, what is it, like 40% of young women now are predicted to remain childless throughout their lives. And it's probably worse for men, if I had to guess. So, right now, that's just, you've just got this kind of like generalized feeling of like sort of ennui and apathy and resentment. But um, to a considerable degree, you mentioned like the economic situation earlier as one of the contributing factors, and that I think is a really, really big one. Um, if you're in your 20s and can barely make rent, despite the fact that you went to university, got an engineering degree, have a six-figure income, and so on, and you're living hand to mouth, like, and there's no prospect of you being able to afford a house. Well, no girl is going to come along and be like, oh yeah, let's get married and have babies. Great idea. I can barely support myself. You can barely support yourself. Like, together we can barely support ourselves. Let's bring more.
Well,
Let's get a condo in the middle of this crowded city, um, for four
yeah,
thousand
with
dollars a
no
month
extended family because
with
everyone
no
went to
extended
college,
family to
so
help out.
they went around the country and everyone's working full time and the boomers don't give a shit, and they're in Florida.
Well, so I've been reading this really interesting book that uh, a friend pressed into my hands in a group chat recently, called America 3.0, where it's kind of this optimistic um, look at like the near future, sort of like the 2040s era, and like and how we can get to like a positive future. And one of the interesting things that they go into here is they're talking about sort of the Saxon style family life and the cultural implications of this. So it turns out that this sort of like nuclear family, where you have an independent household with, you know, a husband, a wife, and an X number of kids, in a detached home with some land around it, is a model that goes back to like the fifth century. Like the Saxons have just always done this. And one of the correlates of that is that if you don't have access to land, uh, the birth rate goes down. So apparently, the English birth rate has fluctuated wildly through time. And during and not just like the modern industrial era, but like going back into medieval times, um, where like the age of marriage was always systematically higher in England than it was in other cultures. Like mid 20s was pretty normal throughout the medieval period. Uh, there were a lot of periods where most people actually didn't have babies, because they couldn't get the land to have a house
Right.
and support themselves. Um, but another interesting aspect of this is, so you mentioned like the extended family being around and so on, which you hear a lot about. I think especially from like Catholic integralist types, who are like, oh, like it's you need the grandparents and the cousins and whatever around to help look. It's like, okay, but actually historically, um, in Saxon society, like that wasn't really a strong factor, um, because one of the aspects of that kind of like nuclear family model is that since you're kind of each nuclear family is responsible for supporting itself, and as a corollary to that, they have quite a bit more liberty to decide, where they're going to live than is the case in sort of other cultures, which meant that people tended to move around a lot more than they did in other places. So, well, it's not necessarily that uncommon, even in the medieval times, for people to be living, far enough away from their parents or siblings
Sure.
that they would not have access to, free child care services or what have you. Um, I think the main thing, honestly, isn't so much the atomization and the high degree of mobility, which has been supercharged by modern economy and technology, no question. I think the main thing is really the land is like, people just can't afford houses. And why is that? Well, that's because our entire economy is a real estate Ponzi scheme, which is propped up by um, uh, continuous injection of biomass from third world countries, whose main purpose is to keep the real estate um, as expensive as possible, which then prices it out of the hands of young people who are just starting out and don't have access to a lot of capital, which then leads to young people just indefinitely postponing family formation.
Right. Yeah. There's so many factors at play there. I think that, yeah, low birth rates has been a thing that civilization has gone through, and it seems like what I've heard, and I don't think historians have studied this enough, is that as society gets prosperous, it's kind of a virtuous cycle with, birth rates being high, civilization progresses, there's prosperous times, birth rates seem to drop, and then there's kind of a vicious cycle of less prosperous times. But we're in a very unique era, and we live in the most interesting of times. So I want to loop back to making it as an independent writer. Um, I'm not convinced that the Substack model of people buying subscriptions is a great way to do it. Um, like I was saying at the beginning of the podcast, you're like you have 10,000 subscribers plus, which is, top 1%. Like, so, and if you can't make a living with that economic model, you're, I just don't think it's the best model. I think that, perhaps an even better model would be something like what Wikipedia does, where it's more of a crowdfunding model. So you're asking for a one-time payment versus a subscription payment. It's a variable rate, and then you're trying to fund a goal. So maybe your goal for the year is $50,000 from your Substack reader, and so you just once a month you ask for $5 to $10, and they get some immediate benefit. You send them an ebook or whatever, and so you have 10,000 subs. They each give you $5. You have $50,000. That plus book sales on top of that. Um, now we're looking at potentially being able to survive.
Yeah. So I should first state that like I'm a little perverse in what I do on Substack, because like I've never put no, I put one thing behind a paywall and I took it out from behind the paywall like immediately after. Uh, but like for the most part, like I everything is out there for free. So I kind of have to guilt my readers into tipping me effectively. Um, and well, human nature being what it is, like if you don't have to pay, most people won't pay, and I'm no different in this respect. And if I paywalled more aggressively, I would almost certainly be able to make a fair bit more money. How much more I don't know, but like I wouldn't be surprised if I could like double or even triple. Uh, so just based on comparing my percentage of paid to unpaid subscribers to what other writers tell me they're able to do. So some of them are able to get up to like 10% paid subscribers.
Wow.
I'm well below that. Yeah.
Yeah,
If I could
that's
do
really
if I
strong.
no if I had a 10% level, I would be financially independent. There's no question. Um,
Yeah.
but the downside of paywalling things is that your exposure is massively less. I mean, your readership for an article will drop by, an order of magnitude if you paywall it. And most people will not pay to read it, right? So, and then you get fewer free subscribers as a result of that article. So there's a trade-off. And Substack themselves will tell you this. But like when you're first starting off, like don't paywall anything, like put it all out there for free. This is how you
Right,
grow.
right.
And then at a certain point, you sort of cash in, right? And you start, aggressively paywalling things and trying to convert your free readership into a paid readership.
Yeah.
Uh,
I would like to
for
see more
and
options though. I just don't think a lot of people want more subscriptions. Like if I want to like support 40 writers on Substack financially, I don't want to have 40 subscriptions that you know, I want
Yeah,
to
it adds
do
up. It adds
one-time
up fast.
payments.
Yeah, it adds up really fast. So I know Substack has actually talked about this, but doing like one-time payment things, they're reluctant to do it because they're worried that would cannibalize their core business model. So from the perspective of a writer, it's way better to have a supporter who is giving you, $10 a month every month to keep doing what you're doing, um,
Mm, mm.
versus a reader who gives you $10 to read an article and then maybe it doesn't come back again. Uh, so there's sort of a trade-off there, and like this is Brian Niemeyer's neo patronage model as well is actually quite similar to what Substack is trying to do. His idea is essentially like uh, not just selling books on Amazon, although he does that too, and there's no reason not to. Um, but like cultivating that community who uh, are happy to pay you to keep doing what you're doing. And like, yeah, maybe they get like benefits out of it, like they get like an ebook every once in a while or something like that. But it's patronage, right? Just like Renaissance era patronage, where the Medici would or Medici, is it Medici? I'm terrible with Italian names.
I say Medici.
It is it Medici, okay. He would like basically pay for like Leonardo da Vinci or Michelangelo or whoever to like just kind of do their thing. And like every once in a while, he might say, like, hey, make a nice statue of me or something. But for the most part, they were just like left to their own devices. Make whatever you want to make on whatever schedule you
Right.
make it. And,
I agree, but I think
ever,
that's a different model. I think that's a handful of rich people sponsoring, and it's not really
yes,
like a recurring
yes,
subscription.
that's yes,
Uh,
that's patronage. Neo patronage is
ah,
crowdsourcing that, right?
right, right,
Where rather than finding like a couple of rich people to bankroll you, you use the power of the internet to get maybe a couple thousand not rich people to give you a little bit of money, and but then you add it all up, like you're actually making enough that you don't have to worry about how you're going to pay the bills, and you can
yeah.
concentrate on your creative work. And
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
I just don't think it should be a recurring subscription. I think it should be like once a year you reach out to your list and say, I'm trying to get this much to fund, these projects
Yeah,
or my
that's
year
how
of,
that's how Kickstarter works. And there's
right,
nothing stopping a writer from using all of these. And this is like my
right.
sort of very hazy long-term plan is like right now I'm purely just Substack subscription based, right? But like I do have sort of vague plans. Like I should write a book at some point and put it out on Amazon, right? Uh, or doing Kickstarter type stuff in order to because that's basically how Kickstarter works, right? Like you have
Yeah,
a half
GoFundMe.
a
Yeah.
half finished project and you're like, hey everyone, like here's this half finished project. I want to finish this project. It's going to take this much money to finish, so I need to raise this amount. And if I raise it, I'll finish it, and everyone who backs it will get, whatever benefits. And then you put like stretch goals on top of that. And some of those can be remarkable. My friend Tree of Woe, Alexander Macros, he's a game designer. Did this sort of Dungeons and Dragons D20 system called Adventure Conqueror King, and I think he raised $200,000 on Kickstarter in a couple of days
Wow.
to bring that to completion. Yep. And then of course there's Brandon Sanderson. This was massively disruptive in the publishing world. So Brandon Sanderson, he's probably the best-selling fantasy writer on the planet right now, uh, and he's published by traditional publishing houses. Like he's not like an indie author or anything like that. He's been around. He finished like Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time series is how he made his name, I think originally. Um, but he had a Kickstarter a year or two ago that raised $22 million,
Damn,
which
dude.
was
Yeah, we're entering
yeah,
a new
and
world
like
for
it's completely and like that. So like I mean, there's basically no author who gets an advance from the publishing house of $22 million. That just doesn't happen, right? Um, and he was so like just the sheer amount he was able to raise blew them all out of the water and demonstrated that Brandon Sanderson does not need Tor books or whoever,
Y-
right? Like
yeah,
Tor
no, the
books needs
publishers are
Brandon
useless.
Sanderson. Oh,
Like,
it's sad. It's really sad that's happened to the publishers. I
yeah.
remember going into like a bookstore in the 80s and 90s, and I'd like go up to the sci-fi fantasy
Oh,
section, and I would spend hours trying to decide which book I wanted to read because there were so many that looked amazing, but I only had $5 to spend on a book, right? And now, I'll go in and I'll spend a couple hours trying to find one thing that looks worth reading.
yeah.
And a
Actually, I
huge,
do not remember the '80s or the '90s. But I do
I'm
remember
probably a,
how it was. Yeah.
I'm probably a little older than you. You remember how it was when?
In the early 2000s, we would have like book fairs and we'd go to literally, I would go to the library. I'd stand in line at the library to check out a book. I don't do that anymore. But yeah, I mean, it begs the question, why do you not have a book available for me to purchase on Amazon? I think you said you've
um,
written multiple books and just not published them, which I can't fathom. I just wrote my first book and I just got my first copy. And it's not hard to self-publish. It's like why didn't you?
so
Why
like,
haven't you?
so I don't, in terms of like an actual novel, sadly, I think I've only ever actually finished one novel, like sort of a first draft of it, and I'm sure it's terrible. Uh, and I'm not even sure where that draft is because I wrote this many years and a couple of laptops ago, and yeah, I no idea where that document is. But it also, I'm sure it was just awful. Um, I've got a couple of novels that I sort of like got partway through and then just sort of put aside over the last few years, which I'm hoping to finish one of them sometime soonish. And uh, bring to publication properly. Um, Multiple of my readers have encouraged me to do just like a compendium of like greatest hits essays or something and put that out.
For sure, that would
Uh,
be a slam dunk. That would be a slam dunk, 100%. And
yeah, yeah.
I,
I
what I'm,
would. The
what
thing
I'm,
is, I would
because
want to. I would want to do that. I would want to do that correctly. By which I mean, first of all, like just like dumping it all into a book, and I would want there to be like a bit more original work into it. Um, like have some kind of theme to the book, some kind of through line to it that connects the various pieces together, which might require writing some more text and what have you. But another factor is visual, because I've really come to enjoy the uh, visual aspect of my blog. And the problem, of course, is those images are, like they're all owned, so like
I think you're
I
making
I don't.
excuses. All I hear is
Yeah,
excuses.
yeah, totally, totally. None of these are insurmountable. Uh, these are just kind of like things that I've got at the back of my mind that, okay, like, I need to get like a good artist, figure out exactly how that's going to work. Also, in my defense, so I've spent the last several months helping Alexander Svetsky um, edit his upcoming book, The Bushido of Bitcoin. And this is used up more time than I expected, because I had to go through and read this whole thing multiple times, and editing an entire book is a lot of work, a lot of work,
Yeah,
let me tell you. But that's coming out soon. I've got another book that I've agreed to help Grant Smith and Chris Bray with, Populist Playbook. The idea is it'll be like a sort of right-wing rules for radicals, sort of updating for the information age. Uh, I slowly like sit down and start. I mean, a lot of it's gonna be adapting existing essays, but still, it's gonna be a fair bit. Hopefully, that will be in a few months. Um, so like, part of it is just like having all of these projects, and
for sure, man. Yeah,
uh, yeah, yeah. It's also why I haven't finished any of the novels, because like that's a lot of work to write a novel. And so one of the downsides actually of substacking, which I didn't properly appreciate until I got really into it, is that it does make a lot of demands on your time, right? So there's
yeah.
the sort of pressure to put out new content uh on something approaching a regular cadence, and then there's all of the interaction with the readership. A lot of my blogs, a lot of my essays will get like hundreds of comments.
Hundreds. And you
Yeah,
like and comment back, which is great, and that's really how you grow. But
yes,
I always and honestly, you must like doing it. I think
I love
you
doing it. I
and
absolutely
yeah,
love doing it. I absolutely love doing it. So, I'm not. This is not a complaint, and I'm so grateful for the engagement level I get from my readers. Um, and so many of them are really smart people who have like really interesting things to say. Uh, but it does take time, right? So like there's a kind of cadence of like sort of like a pattern. I'll spend a few days writing something, get it into publishable shape, put it up, and then the next day, and sometimes the next 2 days, is just me responding to people. Like I'll wake up, I've got 150 comments sort of like
wow.
excuse me, piled
I
up
have
on
like
like.
I have 12, and I'm like, wow, this is too much.
Yeah, no, I mean, I will literally sit there on my phone for like 5 hours, just like,
That's crazy.
responding to comments. And then like, but I get to the bottom of the list of the comments, and like, oh, and there's 20 new comments in that time, and I respond to them, and like, but readers like it when you engage them like that. It does build a connection with them, which is, very helpful. I think that people have said this is one of the reasons they think that I've grown as much as I have, is that I put that time into engaging with my audience. Um, Writing a novel, of course, that would basically be like, okay, I'm going to disappear for like 3 months, maybe 6 months. I'm not going to have
So
time to like.
I
Hmm.
want to touch on this. I think this is really important. A few things changed my mind. I read three authors in series. I read Paul Millard, who I actually I met in real life in 2016, and then I saw him. He wrote this book, Pathless Path, and what he did was he left his
Oh, that
consulting
sounds
job in
familiar.
Boston.
Sounds
So
very
yeah,
familiar.
he
Pathless
he
Path.
left McKinsey in Boston. He said, "I'm done with the corporate world." And he started his blog and he started building it and just writing, sharing every week. And then he took his best blog posts basically that resonated well with listeners, and he talked with tons of his audience, and then he used that as the skeleton for a book, and he fleshed it out. Took him about 13 months, and now he has the number one book on Amazon in career development, and he sold, I don't know, 55,000 copies, and he's got another book coming out, and then so I said, that's a really cool model to do that. You're building your readership, you're seeing what resonates, you're developing your ideas in conversation, and then you're using that to build a book. Um, Very smart. And so then I read Mike Ma, who, have you read Mike Ma?
I haven't read him. I'm aware of him. He's got the black metal book where the
Yeah, he's
apocalypse starts in Florida or something.
yeah, it's Harassment Architecture is his first book,
That's
and then
it.
Gothic Violence was the second
Right.
one. And it's kind of just like, yeah, just like crazy chaos, like stories from his life, like bullshit dreams he has, like kind of like shoot from the hip, run and gun, like fiction, everything. And it was just like packed in this book. And it just basically is like incoherent, but I just loved it. I was like, this is one of the most inspiring books I've ever like read. And I don't agree with most of it. But it was just like so fun to read. And I was like, wow, this guy had so much fun writing that. And I was like, I'm just gonna do that. And that's like when start inspired me to write a book. And then I just
Mm.
looked at Paul's model and I said, I'm gonna do that. And then Jed McKenna was the third guy who inspired my style, my actual writing style is, personal stories, insight through entertainment. And once again, his first book, Spiritual Enlightenment, The Damnedest Thing, it has like a specific kind of goal in mind, but the subsequent two books are really just fun chapters through his life, and it kind of weaves together nicely. So anyways, I would encourage you to take the your favorite essays that have resonated with your audience and use that as the lattice work to build something great.
Yeah,
And
and I've got sort of already in my back of my mind a sort of through line of a few essays that I think could make the framework for a good book. So one thing I wanted to comment on what you're saying there, I sort of agree with profoundly, is I think the first guy, the former McKinsey consultant. Uh, so what he was doing there, using the blog to test out the ideas, build a readership, and then um, use that as a springboard to launch the book. This is exactly how writers need to think about a platform like Substack.
yeah,
This
I
is
agree.
this is bang on. So like the idea of using it as the sole source of income is probably not going to work for most writers. Might work for some,
No.
but it won't work for most. Uh, but what it does do is give you the ability to grow an audience organically. Um, that does itself provide an income stream, which is kind of what blogging has always done, right? It's just that like before Substack came along, unless you were working at a magazine or something, blogging was there was no way to monetize it. I mean, advertising revenue maybe, but I mean,
Yeah,
come
you're like
on.
selling wine.
Yeah, yeah, you need millions of readers to make any decent amount of advertising, and like it's a joke, right? Um, but with the subscription model, you get small number of people who are willing to support you, but okay, that's an income stream. But then you've also got a much larger audience of free subscribers. Uh, and you can use that audience as a way of, marketing other works that you put out there. I've actually had, I mean, again, I haven't put a book out myself yet, but I have shilled a couple of books on postcards from Barstool. Um, One was this really clever, like it was like it's like a children's book for small unit tactics, um, which a friend of mine sort of put together for, I guess, like, kids who want to play paintball the right way kind of thing, but also to help them train them up to make them good little citizens, uh, good as in effective citizen soldiers. And it's Professor Cooper's tactical primer. It's called. It's just wonderful. It's so
Honestly, I'm
good.
interested.
Yeah,
I
right.
want to
No,
write
it's
that
it's so
down.
bad. He's a really interesting guy, Nelson Elliott. He's a Texan who he puts out like kids book. He another of his kids books that a friend of mine bought and thought was really quite charming was the little Havamal, where he just takes like the Norse epic or Norse poetic work, the Havamal, Odin's wisdom, basically, and like has it with like children's illustrations. It's great. Uh, so I shilled that on the day it came out, and Nelson told me that like that was like the single best day of sales that he'd ever had. And my readership was substantially smaller back then. That was like a year ago, so probably about half the size it is now. And then a few months back, I reviewed a hard science fiction novel by a debut author called Theft of Fire, which I really enjoyed. And the author, well, his wife actually got back to me right after that and said that that was the single biggest bump in sales they'd had since releasing the book about a month before. Um, and I saw that, the writer on Twitter noting that his book had gone from like 37 in the Amazon rankings, which is already pretty good, up to like climbed like 25, like within like a couple days
Nice.
of that review coming out. Yeah, well, he'd also gotten into a fight with like some big tech tech bro on Twitter, who had a huge following, so he suspected that had something to do with the bump in sales as well,
Right, right,
right?
right.
So in disentangling the two is
I think I
difficult. So
remember that.
how much of an
Um,
effect I had, I don't know. But to my mind, this was kind of a proof of concept. Like, if I can
oh yeah,
put out
yeah.
something that and by a different writer and that results in them having a big bump in sales, okay, well, presumably if I do it right for my own work, then that would be a bigger bump in sales. That
Yeah, yeah, for sure. But I think like the book promotion game is it's a long game. Ultimately, yeah, you want that
yes,
like initial kind of like boost to get you on the charts, if you
yeah,
can. But for me, I'm playing the long game. Like podcasts, are a great way to get out there guesting on podcasts, which you're already doing.
hmm
Um, as well as, I mean, you
that's
wouldn't be
why
doing in person.
I never turn
You
down a podcast invitation. I don't get so many that I'm even tempted to turn them down.
right,
I
right.
accept everyone that because like yeah, get in front of a new audience and maybe get a few subscribers. Like absolutely.
And I think Substack right now is just really great for meeting high quality people. Like, um, I met you. I've video called with a bunch of people. I've hosted a meetup in Boston where Substack writers came. I want to do a meetup in New Hampshire, which is where I live now. And I'm meeting like
Live
a bunch of great people
live
as
for
compared
live
to
free
any
or
other
die,
social.
eh?
Yes, sir. Hey, come on down. I feel like if I had to guess, you're in Eastern Canada,
Yep.
um, Toronto, Ontario.
Not
I
far.
guess you don't have to say, but
I'm not in Toronto, but I'm not too far from Toronto by Canadian standards.
yeah, man, come to my meetups. I guess that's the downside of being pseudonymous is you're not gonna really want to like show up in person to hang out with people. That would be the end
So
of that.
that uh yes and no. I mean, like, I've never done meetups for my own readers personally, but I have gone to events and met people. And I was in New York a few months ago for a couple of weeks and went down to Sovereign House a couple times. Ended up randomly meeting a few people who were fans of my work, which was crazy. Um, but I just introduced myself as John Carter. It's like I don't have to tell them my real
Nice.
name.
Yeah, I
Um,
guess like the risk is they take a photo.
yeah, yeah, and I'm I'm fairly sanguine about like the risk of doxing, to be honest. Like I maintain pseudonymity almost as much as a game as anything else. I know you're supposed to be, really terrified of it. But it does seem like there's been a vibe shift in the culture over the last couple of years. Uh, when people do get doxxed, it seems like a lot of the time it actually results in like, if they have some kind of internet celebrity, they just get like a big bump in sales, and like when Lomez get doxxed, for example, recently.
Yeah,
And
make
like
sure you get
people,
doxxed after your book is out.
yeah, no, exactly, right. Like I said at the beginning, a large part of the reason is just so I don't have to think about like what people in my life, my personal life would say, or just so it doesn't embarrass them uh, too much. But I would probably be more worried about it if I was still sort of like trying to have an academic career. But um, I concluded emotionally like a while ago, I think, that this was probably not the path for me. And frankly, I think the legacy institutions are going to contract dramatically over the next several years. And you already see in academia, like enrollment is down, colleges are closing,
Yep.
uh, the prestige associated with the institutions is just hemorrhaging out. Huge parts of the culture, just like if a professor said it, that's how you know it's bullshit. Like I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
people
yeah,
have
for sure.
yeah, and like and because all of these are, some of these are demographically driven, like enrollment dropping is to a large degree just demographic, and there's nothing that can be done about that in the short term. Part of it is ideological. You just have so many people embedded in the institutions now who are just unsalvageable and can't, and the only way that you could sort of remove that ideological influence and get those institutions back on track, you'd have to just fire all of these people, which would be the same thing as like burning the institutions down for all intents and purposes. So I think like it's just going to be this process for them of going through like um, an extended period of senescence where they just kind of decline in cultural importance. And you come back in 10 or 20 years and universities are probably going to be considered these weird little intellectual backwaters, like convents or
Yep.
not or monasteries, where it's like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, there's these old women with blue hair who
Yeah.
don't believe in
And they're funded
biological
by
sex.
taxpayers.
Well, however much longer that continues, right? Um, because elected representatives still have control over the purse strings. Um, and I think we are going to be seeing, a lot of populist electoral uprisings. And one is already happening in Europe right now as we speak with the European parliamentary elections. Uh, so there's that factor. Um, the taxation ability of the state itself, I think, is probably going to suffer a lot in the coming years. First, because just the economic problems and the smaller tax base, there's just less money to spread around. Um, they can take out loans, but that's just going to cause inflation, so then the money doesn't go nearly as far. Uh, and then at the same time, I think there's going to be increasing pressure on everyone who's not directly part of the system, which is most of us, to start diversifying their economic activity outside of the system. And you already see
Oh
people,
yeah.
people don't have careers anymore. They don't have like they don't have jobs. They have side hustles. Like almost everyone I know is like they have like four or five like little like side hustles going on, and they don't really have much in the way of institutional loyalty to any one source of that. Um,
And
but
that might
like
be just
the
in your
next,
social circle, but I do think that's growing. Like I saw the average like duration at a job is down from 8 years to 2 years.
yeah, I believe that. I easily believe that. And I think that you're also, with the cryptocurrency, Bitcoin revolution, we're at very early stages of what that's going to do, which I suspect in the medium to long term is going to result in a kind of parallel transaction infrastructure that is extremely difficult to tax. One idea that I've seen thrown around is to, we could use AI systems to buttress a barter economy, which would enable people to trade goods and services directly without going through the intermediary of a monetary transaction. And okay, well, how does the state tax 3 hours of child caring service in exchange for a bushel of potatoes, right? Like, I mean,
Hmm.
like, are they going to send someone by to like take a potato out of the basket and like force the child carer to spend 20 minutes looking after an immigrant child? Like, how does that work exactly?
My
So
experience with
like
bartering
basically,
has been that people tend to think that their service is like worth more, like 3 hours of childcare. The person providing the childcare thinks that theirs is worth more than the potatoes, and the people with the potatoes think theirs is worth more than the childcare. So
oh yeah,
I'm
yeah. That's so. There's
skeptical,
always
but sorry,
there's
go
there's always
on.
negotiation, but that's always negotiation, of course. But that's why I kind of wonder if powered by AI might actually be the answer there, because it would sort of
Oh man,
take take the negotiation out of the hands of the humans involved and make it into a more sort of transparent, standardized process. Uh, so I don't know. That's very
interesting.
speculative. It's very speculative, but like in
Don't you
general,
think
I
that like you need it needs the actual this network that we're talking about, parallel network of transacting, it has to be built in terms of hardware. And I think that the hardware side is where the government could try to interfere.
could try. They could try. Yep. Yep.
Yeah,
Um,
they could attempt.
whether like in like the pattern for the last few decades, even not just the century, but going back into the last century, has consistently been for the government to uh, try to interfere in information technology in one way or the other. Um, and to a certain degree, that's worked, but to a certain degree, it has not. They've lost, I think, as many battles as they've won. You take in the 1990s, there was the cypherpunk movement, where the U.S. government tried to have public key encryption or PGP, pretty good encryption, I think that stands for, classified as a weapons system because it was unbreakable by the NSA. And the cypherpunks uh, basically made it a moot point by spreading the technology around so much, making it so widely available that you couldn't put that genie back in the bottle, and they just had to adapt. There's even this really funny
Right.
website, like sort of in the late '90s, where as this was all like a political hot button issue, where you could just like go to the website, press like a go button, and it would send one copy of the code base for PGP across international boundaries. So from like a computer in the US to like a computer in like, I don't know, Germany or something. And then it would like tell you, congratulations, you are now an international weapons smuggler. You are an
So yeah,
arms
we
dealer.
we definitely see
So
the institutions breaking down at multiple levels. The government, their ability to tax, their ability to provide services, the education institutions. Like when I want to learn something new, I'm not even thinking for 1 second that I'm going to go buy a course from like a college. I'm thinking of going
uh-huh.
online to
Yep,
independent teachers, and then health.
Yep.
Like we could talk forever about that. And
Yep.
then obviously
Exactly.
media is doing layoffs. Substack, our publications are growing double digits every year, triple digits sometimes. Where else
Hmm.
are the institutions? Are there? Am I missing any here?
Well, there's the military.
Hmm. Interesting.
Military's in a rough shape. No one wants to join the military. Particularly young white men are just checked out for a lot of really obvious reasons. Um,
They
you've
want
had
the
20
black,
year
lesbian, trans people.
Yeah, so I mean, you have the culture war stuff, which has alienated them, but you've also got 20 years of pointless failed wars in the Middle East, right?
Right.
Um, yeah, so like it's sort of the combination of those two, I think, has alienated the traditional warrior class. So the result is that the militaries are not getting the recruits they need. The recruits they are getting are really low quality. And this isn't just the American military. This is every military in NATO. Uh, I think that's going to, what the implications of that are, and I mean, it could go in multiple directions. I mean, if we have a war, maybe they try to have conscription. Now you're putting weapons in the hands of people who kind of hate you, so maybe they don't want to do that. But they haven't talked to me about conscription. Um, on the other hand, maybe they start, using foreign mercenaries or something. But of course, there are issues with that as well. They're expensive. It's very likely to alienate the population even more than they are already because it's no longer your boys going over there. It's now like, some foreign third worlders that are getting paid by your government to fight a war you don't care about. So, like, why are you paying for this? Um, and, uh,
How
and,
about religion?
meanwhile,
Like the how about oh, sorry.
oh, religion. Well, I mean, yeah, no,
Do you think
that's a
the
big.
religions have they bottomed out in terms of like the has atheism kind of like maxed out and the religious institutions? I mean, the pews are not exactly full at the churches,
No,
but I
no.
I do see them as I do see churches, at least around me, Christian churches, as a place for free speech, as a place for meeting people IRL. Um, I myself am not identified with a denomination, but a lot of my friends are Catholics.
Mhm.
Um, Talk to me a little bit about that. What are you optimistic?
Yeah,
Are
so the church,
you
I,
religious?
I'm, I'm, I wouldn't describe myself as terribly religious, but I'm certainly not an atheist. Um, my personal experience with churches as social organizations has been pretty uninspiring, to be honest. I have not personally found them to be great places to meet people. Maybe I went to the wrong churches. I don't know. But certainly at the overall societal level, the overwhelming majority of people do not go to church, uh, are not in any recognizable sense Christian. Don't you usually find them describing themselves as like spiritual but not religious, which I could probably describe myself as, embarrassingly enough. So that, and this was one of the themes of my essay, the enchantment of the world, last month. Where this goes, because maybe we have a second religiosity and there's this mass return to Christianity in this kind of like reinvigorated, much more traditional, like Orthodox kind of form. um, Maybe that happens. Maybe that ends up being just phase itself. Maybe something new that we don't really have a word for yet arises kind of
Hmm.
organically. I
Yeah,
That's kind of where I put my money on that, because I think
yeah, me too.
uh, you definitely I mean, there are a small number of people who are like pretty into Christianity, and certainly on the dissident right, that's a more vocal, a larger group, sort of for the obvious reason that the right tends to be more traditionalist in general. But even on the dissident right, you've got, like, I would say probably the majority of them are somewhere between indifferent and hostile to Abrahamic religions in general. Christianity included, uh, have no particularly strong urge or feeling. They don't really, it's like going to church isn't something they want to do. It lacks the ability to inspire them. But at the same time, they're looking for something. Um, and I don't, I don't think like a purely sort of like atheist, secular, desacralized, disenchanted world view is stable in anything like the long term for any society. I think you need something for it to come together around, uh, and to lift people up and inspire them, and
Right.
give them ideals to live up to. And we
I
don't really
think
have that
that
right now.
yeah, I think we don't quite have that put together yet. I think I'm still bullish on Christianity like as a whole in terms of like, procreation into the future. Like I went and stayed with an Amish family for 3 or 4 days last fall and to write about them, and yeah, they're procreating like crazy still.
Oh
And
yeah,
they
no,
love life and they're healthy
the Amish
and
population
they're
doubles every 30
every
years,
20
like
years.
consist.
I think
Yeah,
I think it's 20
I heard
every 20
30.
25 years.
Is it 20? Yeah,
Yeah, it might be
and
up
that
to
goes back
30,
to when they
but
first. Well, that I mean, either way, that's a very fast doubling rate.
right,
Um, and that goes back to their introduction to the North American continent. So
right,
extrapolate that into the future, and you come back in
exactly.
the 23rd century, and the North American population is 50% Amish and 50% Mormon. Um,
That's well, that's about what I calculated was, there's 300,000 of them right now. We're gonna see, five doublings, 300, 600, 1.2 million, 2.4 million, 5 million, 10 million, 20 million, 20
mhm,
million and seven
mhm,
doublings. So in a couple hundred years, there's gonna be 20 million Amish people. And meanwhile, the the atheists, the leftists who have no inoculation against mental illness, they have no psychological, moral, spiritual framework. They're failing to procreate, going crazy, and those
mhm,
numbers are going down. So, but I do think like I am one of the people who was raised in a secular atheist kind of technology, money focused area and family, and I'm now associated with a lot of Christians. I do not personally identify as a Christian, but I'm Christian in some elements. But I'm one of those people who's kind of, looking perhaps for something new to arise, like you're talking about. And I I want to bring up Elon Musk in this conversation because I'm writing about his philosophy of curiosity and truth seeking. I would almost identify um, as perhaps I could describe myself accurately as like a secular truth-seeking Christian. Uh,
mm,
so my conception of God is different than a lot of Christians that I encounter. And for they really like the mystical elements and like the idea of miracles and that they kind of have a conception of God as something outside of themselves. So I
mhm.
differ in that sense, and I have a different interpretation of a lot of the parts of the Bible than a lot of the Catholics that I know. So I'm really into like Elon Musk's kind of philosophy, almost a religion, for lack of a better word, of truth seeking, of curiosity, of exploration. Does any of this resonate?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know that Muskism is quite a religion yet.
Not
Um,
yet.
although it is interesting that the leader of the Mars colony in Wernher von Braun's science fiction novel back in the '60s was named Elon. Uh,
No way.
like,
Okay.
yeah,
Maybe that's where they got
yeah,
the name.
yeah. No, it. It's not a
I'm
very
sure.
common name. I think in the book it was a title, not a proper name. But yeah, so I mean, like truth and curiosity. I mean, this is basically just the essence of what is supposed to drive the scientific project, right? Uh, I think there needs to be a bit more to any conception of divinity than that. Um, but I don't think you can have an accurate conception without those things. truth in particular is so crucial. And like, a lot of people have actually pointed out that one of the reasons that science in its modern form was even possible to do is because Christianity put truth at such a central place in its ontology, and
Right.
then went from there to also posit a rational universe created by a rational God, which could be understood, therefore, by the rational intellect, thus sort of providing the motivation to do science in the first place. While the whole like I am the way, the truth, and the life, truth being very important in the religion, uh, helped to keep the scientists honest. Um, and that is science is secularized and de-Christianized in particular. We seem to be having a lot more trouble with um, scientific honesty. There's more fraud. There's more mistakes. So
Mm.
there's you definitely I think the evidence suggests that you need to have something like that at a very central place. Um, I personally think one needs to go a little beyond just saying truth is very important and sort of leaving it there. I think you need to go a little further than that, um, in terms of your one's conception of the divine, in order for it to really have inspirational force. And this is, um, I think, one of the problems with the way that moderns tend to interact with religious phenomena in general is this tendency towards an overly theological approach, where you're like, well, if we take the Big Bang and we take this, we take the fine tuning problem in the cosmos and uh, yada yada yada, quantum physics. Here's my big fancy intellectual model for how God works, basically. And it's like, you look at that and be like, wow, that's really cool. Like, that's so intricate and mind blowing. That's really amazing. But are you really going to have a strong, deep emotional reaction to that, which is what you
Right.
actually do need
Right.
for that to, right?
Ultimately,
Like,
religion is about cultivating an emotional experience.
that's a huge part of it. Yeah. And this is why I was leaning so hard into the mythos aspect in that essay, is
Right.
that I find this is like the big problem with like the Collinses approach with their space age mechanism. The whole thing was like one fancy, intricate intellectual construct. And, you know, well done as far as that went. Like, I found it very entertaining, um, and don't even disagree with a lot of what they said. But when you just leave it like that, it's kind of this cold, austere um, thing that doesn't really touch the soul. And you need to touch the soul for it to be like
Mm.
genuinely spiritually powerful, and we're really missing
Right.
that. And then but of course, you get people who go too far the other direction, and they sort of like leave the rational part out entirely. They jump from we overemphasize the rational to we should get rid of the rational, and then you end up
Mm.
with like weird woo shit, like or fundamentalist Christians who just like go to like, well, the universe is only 6,000 years old. It says so in the Bible, and that's all you need to do is read the Bible. And okay, I don't find that terribly compelling either. Um, Maybe that's just
I think
me, but
I think you need the musical element of it. You need the ceremony element of it. You need some of the mystical experience element of it, the rites of passage. But
mhm,
another way to like look at this is I don't really think it can be created top down and like, oh, what should we create for our religion? I've listened to your commentary on Malcolm Collins's idea of
mhm,
doing that, and I think what we can do is say what is emerging bottom up, and
right.
I think
Which is that's what I was trying to do
psych
in
yeah.
that's
Right.
what I was trying to do in that essay was kind of like um, to say, okay, like if it's going to be a bottom up process, which I think it has to be, okay, let's look at the bottom. Let's look at this. What is the landscape that whatever emerges, this is the landscape it will emerge from without trying to sort of uh, decide from some kind of a priori principle what it is that we want to emerge, but just like what could emerge, what is the potential, you know? And I didn't
I
even talk
think
about
there's
psychedelics in that. But that's that's a
right.
whole
I
other
was gonna bring
question.
that up. Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
I've done them. I've done almost everything. I don't know how much genuine spiritual insight you get from it. I think in some cases they can be helpful, and I think in other cases, and probably most people's cases, they can be enormously destructive. And if you look at most societies that have used them in a ritual context, they've generally been like they haven't been recreational substances. You don't do it because you want to get fucked on a Friday night, right? Like, it's like you do it at very specific times under very specific circumstances after very specific forms of preparation, um,
right.
and for very
I think
specific purposes.
that's what we're looking for. I think we're looking for guidance. Like the young people these days, I think they want guidance around like I think we do need like a utilitarian kind of like modern-ish religion that gives guidance around psychedelics, that gives guidance around technology use, relationship formation, uh how to choose how, like your
Yes,
work.
yes,
Um
I totally agree. I mean, like, so my friend Rolo refers to this as orthopraxy, and he's a big believer in this. You know, he's deep into the mysticism and such, and his position, which I largely agree with, is that these are technologies, they're techniques. You strip away the woo, and they work for sort of specific, like neuropsychological or neurochemical reasons. Uh, and that we can use these, and we should use these. And actually, a lot of these things have been forgotten or sort of, warped or what have you. But underneath all of it is you can identify these techniques that actually work. Uh, and if we
it'll,
gather those together, then you end up with like a body of techniques that can
yeah,
be used to accomplish to put people in various states of mind or for certain sort of like useful. I mean, you mentioned like coming of age rituals. We don't really have that anymore. We should have that. We're much weaker for not having that. And the it's an almost endless list of
yeah,
things that we should apply these to. Uh, because frankly, life is meant to be religious. Like life is religion in a sense, or it should be. Not that it should be dominated by religion, but that that sense of the sacred and the magical should suffuse everything. We should have our year should be like a liturgical calendar in essence, where we have
right,
sacred times like throughout it for sacred purposes that kind of like
yeah,
give shape and form to our lives, instead of just like okay, time to stuff your face with turkey on Thanksgiving. Okay, summer
yeah.
break.
Consumerism and popular psychology have turned our holy days into shopping, eating, and alcohol festivals.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the danger with the an overly orthopractic approach is that it all just turns into techniques to be used by management for the correct ordering of society. Like at the last seminar, like they've been told that in fact you do need to have a liturgical calendar in order to, and this increases productivity by 32%, probably not even that much, by 3.2% due to the 5% increase in mental health or what have you. Okay, so we'll do that, but there's nothing behind it except the desire to increase productivity or whatever, right? What makes and that and by when they focus on the effects too much rather than the motivation behind the effects, like what it's actually trying to get you to or orient you towards. then the entire thing becomes fake and gay, basically. It's like the analogy would be like, back in the 90s, management started doing these like employee of the month award things. You're like, here's, I just printed this off from the computer, for you. Here's your employee of the month award. And like, that's all it is a piece of paper. And the only reason they're doing it is because like management theory had determined they could slightly increase productivity by, providing the bare minimum of emotional recognition to productive employees. Um, but everyone saw through that very, very quickly because they were like, the only reason you're doing this is because, your spreadsheet says it will slightly increase our productivity. There's no genuine emotion behind it, right? So, like, on the one hand, like, yeah, people emotionally respond really well if you give them that human encouragement and feedback when they have done well. If they appreciate that, that's a good thing to do. On the other hand, if the only reason you're doing it is to get more free work out of them, then, you're an asshole and everyone's going to hate you, right? So, um, ultimately, like for anything religious to mean anything, for it to actually fulfill all of those social functions and psychological and emotional functions it's meant to fulfill, it needs to be pointing not at those functions, but at, like the divine, the numinous, the universe or
Mm.
connection to it, God, in other words. Like it actually, and like not as like a, I don't know. I think I made my point there. I feel like I was
Yeah.
rambling a bit. Yeah,
Let's do
it's
I gotta wrap up soon, but
I was
let's
gonna
do a rapid
say, yeah,
fire question session.
okay.
All right. You open your wallet and there's $500,000. Do you do anything with it?
Buy gold and Bitcoin probably.
Okay. What questions do you really love? What are you curious about?
Curious about practically everything.
True writer.
What questions? What questions do I really? I don't know. I don't know what to do with that question. I don't like that question.
Not this one. Okay. A good question is what are the questions to ask? All right. How are you using AI, if at all? What would you like AI to do for you, if anything?
That's a good question. So
I got one.
I found AI to be useful for a few things. So one is uh, getting a quick summary of a topic, although you can't trust anything it says. But then again, you can't trust Wikipedia either. The
Yeah.
second is chugging through math problems. I found it to be really good at that. So like if I ask it like, uh, you know, if I to give an example, I was curious what the mass equivalence of the human biomagnetic field was a couple of months ago,
Nice.
as generated by all the various electrical activity in the human body, going down to the level of like sort of like um, charge potentials moving across like potassium ion channels in the human cellular system, all the way up to like the beating of the heart. So I had to lead the AI kind of hand by hand, like step by step through it a little bit because it kept kind of like ignoring shit. Uh, but it was perfectly capable of applying the Biot-Savart law and inferring the strength of the induced magnetic field due to various effects inside the body and such. So that was kind of fun. And the third thing that I found it useful for personally is avoiding cliches because AI
Yes.
writing, like
Do the
large
inverse
language
of
models.
AI.
Yes, exactly. It's actually like great for that. Like I sometimes don't know what to title my essays, so I'll dump the text in and be like, give me five ideas for a title, and I never use them. Like I look at them,
No.
okay, those are the obvious things to call it. What can I call it that's not so cliche?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I gotta say, your titles are so unique and intriguing, and I love the intrigue factor in titles. One of my last titles, I thought like, what would John Carter like write for this title? Because I was gonna call it like a trip to Barcelona, but instead I called it From Princess to Plain Ogre. So
nice, nice. Nice.
Absolutely
Yeah,
nothing
no,
but Spain.
having a little bit of drama in there. I know I like it. That's, like I said before, this is one of the reasons that I haven't touched on anything deeply scientific relating to like my own background and my writing, because like I'm just trying to have fun with this at the end of the day,
I
um
love it.
and part although I actually think my titles are generally quite terrible. Like,
A humble man.
um
John Carter, it's been an absolute pleasure talking for 2 hours, and I'm going to continue reading your work. Where can people find you?
they can find me on Postcards from Barsoom on Substack. I've got a Telegram channel, Telegrams from Barsoom, and I'm on Twitter at Martian Word Lords. Word is in WYRD, the Anglo-Saxon term for fate. Um, yeah, thank you so much, Chris, for having me on your podcast. It's been a lot of fun. It's a great conversation.
Thanks, brother. Let's keep in touch. Hey, everybody, it's Chris James. I want to tell you guys about getting healthcare from Crowd Health. I've been a member of Crowd Health for 2 years now, and I gotta say, I've saved over $10,000. What Crowd Health is an organization that facilitates the crowdfunding of healthcare. So they're incentivized to get you the best healthcare and keep you healthy. So it's clearly better than insurance, and it's perfect for people who are self-employed, entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, families, really anybody. It's a way to get out of the big medical industrial complex sick care system that, as everybody knows, is just getting worse and worse every year. Prices are going up, quality of care is going down, and that's because the misaligned incentives in the big insurance system. So I tell everybody about Crowd Health. Join Crowd Health. It's the best. I was skeptical when I was joining 2 years ago, and I thought this is too good to be true. The price of the membership and the amount of benefits is amazing. So I actually talked to them on the phone for 45 minutes, peppering them with questions. I've been a happy member for 2 years. I did a podcast interview with the CEO and founder, Andy Schoonover, really good guy. And I can't recommend it enough, guys. Join Crowd Health. Check out the link in the description for a fat discount. My discount code is Big Win. And that's it, guys. Join Crowd Health. So many benefits. Check it out. You won't be disappointed. It's amazing. I think it's really important for creating a health system in America that actually keeps us healthy. So join Crowd Health. Link in the description. Have a great rest of your day.